pour there, a big hole that goes down about 4 feet. And they'll gather this residue up and they'll pull it down that hole. But the really important thing about that hole is that's where we get water efficiency. If you do tillage and plug them holes, and I don't care if it's that vertical tillage piece of crap that they're trying to sell you now, you plug that hole, and if you plug that hole, the water doesn't go in it, and the air doesn't get in it. Those are two really important things. Is you've got to have that soil open to air and water, and the air got to get out for the water to go in. Now, if you did tillage a foot deep, the water would go a foot deep, and then it stops, and then it can evaporate from there. And we'll walk behind an irrigator. We got irrigator that we'll walk behind, and the water just goes down those big holes, and then it soaks in from the side. So we don't. It's almost impossible with annual crops to get roots deep enough to cycle the nutrients back. And if you're only growing corn and soybeans for 3 months of the year and not doing anything else, there's no way you're balancing water cycles of the tallgrass prairie. And you've got to have more going on in there, and you got to have some more going on deeper. And what Grandpa did is he put in perennial sequences every now and then. He'd put in grass or alfalfa, and he'd grow that for a few years, and then he'd go back to annual cropping. But if you do that now, the federal government's going to kick your butt. I mean, the farm program, you're at a real disadvantage. But maybe you can grow them both at the same time. Remember when we came off the yard, I said, well, I planted peas in that switchgrass, and then I harvested the pea hay. In your country, you might well be able to grow canola and get that harvested before your switchgrass and big blue stem would take off. I'm not sure. But
that's some taproot. You start looking at these resource concerns. Until you sit down and identify the resource concerns on your farm, that combination of cover crop doesn't really make any sense. And that's what you have to step through first. Cover crop field, what's the first thing you observe?
Roots.
Yeah, lots of roots. Lots of roots. And you know, there's something that's kind of easy to say, but it's evidently very difficult to do. You start talking about 4 or 5 concepts. You know, you start talking about minimizing disturbance. You start talking about putting a cover on the soil. Those 2. You start talking about diversity, adding diversity, 3rd. And 4th one, a continual live plant. Because you're always going to be harvesting sunlight that way. You're always going to be feeding the biology. And if you want to throw a 5th one in there, you can throw the integrating livestock. And those are 5 things that are so easy to say, but they're so difficult to do. And there's a real art and science about that. And nobody's better at that art and science than a farmer is. And I think
we decided, well, let's weigh these cattle in, graze them, see how many days we can graze, weigh them coming out, and they gained 3.1 pounds per day, and I think it was $1.09. So we ended up, you know, after all the expenses, figuring in seeding the cover crop and grazing, we netted another 66 bucks per acre off that cover crop, and that's not figuring the oats and peas we had on there before. And we only grazed half of it, and so that next spring we wanted to put everything into corn, and we had a board meeting and mentioned to Jay and the other board members, well, you know, everybody's question is we're sucking the soil profile dry. This would be a great time because it's the driest spring. So Jay contacted Hal, and he pulled these soil tests, you know, in the controlled where we didn't have cover crop and where we did. And on growing all that, it took, what, 1 or 0.04 inches, right?
Yeah. Page 17. Yep.
0.04 inches of moisture difference had that much less in the cover crop where there's cover crop versus not. But I mean, to grow that and get off what I could, and you know, there's a lot of the soil health benefits and organic matters and all that stuff that come behind. We never put no figure on that, but I mean, it's just amazing what we've done on that stuff. And then the corn harvest too afterwards, you know, we had less chemical we had to use on there because it had great weed suppression, and it yielded, I can't remember what the, it was like what, 40 or 60 bucks an acre.
And so consequently you start to see these horizontal breaks that occur in those compaction layers. And after that 75 years of plowing, we probably did 25 years of Concord air drills with sweeps. And so then we got another compaction layer just a little bit higher. And so those are two items that are still with us today, and it takes a while. You know, you can go to any field in Burleigh County and you're still going to find those. But we've made big progress in dissolving them. But it's a biological solution. It's the biology that builds those pore spaces back. They build the soil aggregates. And so as the biology builds the soil aggregates back, the biology is like us. When you think about biology, think of us. Do you like the temperature today?
Yeah.
Ideal for the biology too.
You did.
You like a balanced meal? So does the biology. So what's happening over here, you got a lot of different root exudates in this cover crop feeding the biology. Those are simple sugars. And so consequently, you know, anytime, and as far as a home, you know, if you have a compressed home in the soil, all you're really going to have left is the bacteria. And so as we build these pore spaces back and we make the home again, we put a little bit of a roof on it, and we have a food supply in there, life is good. And things change. Because it's these guys that run all the cycles. The nutrient cycles, the water cycles, they run all the cycles. Now we got food. We got food. And we got everybody together. What happens with people when they get food and everything together? They're all, there's like a big, exactly, there's a big party. Okay, so there's a big party. And so consequently, also the soil biology is like a jungle. There's big guys and little guys. And guess what? Big guys eat little guys in the jungle. And that's what's going to happen next to this root as well. And so all of these biological processes are occurring there. Well, now thinking that in terms of what do you think is happening over here where you have so many different root systems. Okay, now you kicked it up a notch. Because now you got all this diversity and all this biology is happening on an increase. Now just, you know, we underappreciate what the biology does for us.
We can't just be satisfied with status quo and robbing from the resource. We need to build it back. And, you know, you need to ask yourself, what were the native prairies in your area? Well, no one knows for sure, but the best I can find out is that native prairies in this area were probably in the 8+% organic matter level. So I'm still severely degraded. I need to get at least to there and beyond. I would like fall to have 10% organic matter soils here. And I think we can do it, but it's going to take regeneration in order to do it.
Went in the profile. So there's no runoff, because total time, where were we at?
We had 12.2 inches in 5.5 hours, another 1.4 the next afternoon.
But the first 8 inches, no runoff. So we took that first 8 inches in. The next 4 inches, now the profile's full. Truthfully, seriously full. And so then the next 4 inches ran overflow across the soil surface. And we had no water erosion. It moved residue. Moved the residue on the fields from higher areas to lower areas, that type of thing. But we had no erosion. But the next day, Gabe and I came out because I wanted to put my spade in the ground and take a look at that soil because I'm thinking this has got to be just a puddled mess. And we put the soil in, we put the spade in the field, and it was in corn. And I truthfully think we could have ran one of those big wheel custom sprayers. We could have ran one that afternoon.
You can't buy it, you know, so you got to grow it. And so, you know, when we do a cover crop mix, you know, we tend to lean more towards trying to grow the carbon. Because I can always buy nitrogen. I may not like to, but it's available. But I can't buy carbon. So I have to grow that. So in most of our cover crop mixes that we use on our own ground, we tend towards higher carbon mixes because we want that residue. Because year in and year out, the more residue you have, the higher your yields will be. You know, across of it. And I think most people here would agree. You know, when you have more residue in your field, you know, your yields will almost always be higher.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
How would your typical?
But what we did is we used our 1790 planter, which is a 15-inch planter. So we just planted the corn in 30-inch rows, and the inner plants, we used different seed discs. So basically, the inner crop is planted twice as thick as the corn. So roughly on the seeds that we're able to singulate would be about 60-some thousand. Now this clover, I tried using a sugar beet plate, but it was just flying out of there. And you know, I don't know how thick that is, but it's thick. But we were really quite pleased with how much growth is there and how green it still is. So this was all planted at the same time. And we did not come back in and replant anything. So.
And this of course is irrigated, but you know, it's probably had less than 5 inches of water added to it.
Yeah, probably between 5 and 6. You can see the pivots, the end guns right there. So yesterday morning we had about 90 hundredths, and it probably put on about 90 hundredths. So what you're standing on yesterday morning would have had 1.80 inch on it. So you can see the ground's taking it in plenty good. And we're probably pulling our profile down pretty hard. We're not really watering to keep the full profile.
How's the weed control doing the intercropping? Is that something you struggle with?
Well, yeah, we did. That's why because we had 20 acres here or something that we had this on, and we sprayed a lot of it out because there was a lot of weeds coming. You know, I mean, you can see that, you know, the pigweed and the water hemp and different things. So we sprayed quite a bit of it out, yeah, just so we didn't have a disaster on a large scale. You know, actually, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. You know, once the corn got up and canopied, it choked some of those weeds out, and they kind of died off. And I think the rows that have the best cover crop growth probably have the least weeds. You know, so you know, that's always going to be a challenge. You know, because once you put this out there, you're pretty limited. You know, you're either in or you're out at that point, because there's not, unless you were to do like a Roundup Ready soybean, you know, in there. But you know, we'd like to stay away from the, you know, we'd like to go with a conventional soybean if we could. But I don't know. You know, we're just kind of experimenting, and probably have seen enough good things that we'll try a bunch of different things again next year.
What would be your advice for people asking that question? Would you tell them to spot spray places where they're getting really bad weeds, or hold out and wait?
Boy, you know, that's going to be tough, because you're not really going to know that you got a weed problem probably until it'll be very difficult to spot spray it. I would say start out on a small enough area that you can either afford to just let it go, or be willing to pull the trigger and spray the whole thing out and say we'll try again next year. Start on a field that has really good residue cover, because that'll help hold the weeds back, you know, as much as anything. You know, if you had cover crop rye and rolled that down or something, you know, that'll hold the weeds back a lot better. I mean, this was just let's see, Brian, this was corn on corn over here, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was just corn stalks last year, so I mean, there's a decent amount of residue, but you know, it's not like a thatch of straw or anything.
Right.
So, you know, anything you can do like that, make sure it's clean, you know, when you plant. Maybe delay the planting. You know, this was the last corn we planted, and part of that was because we didn't want to mess with it until the end, but I think it makes sense, because if you delay your corn planting, then that corn comes up so much quicker. You know, corn planted May 1st gets out of the ground way faster than corn planted April 1st. So then my last spraying before I do all this can be, you know, April 30th or whatever. And so then I'm starting out clean. The corn is getting off to a quick start. The intercrops are getting off to a quick start. So I think if you're going to do this, I would do it, plant it a little later as opposed to earlier, and that will help with some weed control also.
Basically, on my right here, that was rye, and it was a southern rye, Allemang. We harvested that probably about the 20th of June or something, and that's corn 95-day corn, planted probably about the 27th of June. And then on this side was triticale, and harvested probably around the 4th of July, same time that was. And then this corn was planted probably like the 5th of July, somewhere in there. So it's about a week's difference between the two. This stuff looked pretty sick before yesterday or the day before. I don't know what it's going to do. You know, it looked good early. I mean, we had some moisture to get it up. We got a good stand, but
95-day corn opposed to what you would normally plant.
Well, I mean, we can plant up to 115 day, you know, and I think 95 in a normal year would still make it, but it got stunted, so I don't know what we'll have. This right here is, I left this area for, I had insurance come back and look at this because of the breakage, and it's a lot worse than what it was when I harvested it, actually. But you can see, you know, that straw is pretty brittle, and so, you know, a lot of guys talk about wanting to leave as much straw standing as you can to keep it breaking down. But the other problem is when it's this high, a lot of guys have had problems with it breaking off the ground and then blowing in the wind, especially out in western Kansas. What we found is you plant a cover crop in it, you know, even if that corn didn't get any taller than that, it's not going to move. And you can see on the ends, I figured it wasn't going to come up, so we just planted a cover crop in there. So we probably put down, well, over here I probably put 60 pounds of nitrogen. We just used our air seeder ahead of the planter. And on this side, probably it's only 45 pounds or so.
From producers down there. Residue, residue, residue. You got to keep that soil covered. You have to have armor on the soil surface. You need to go with more of the higher carbon crops that cycle through more slope. One of the benefits you have of being down south is your growing season is you know, pretty much year-round almost. Obviously, severe drought years like this and the past one are going to affect it. But use it to your advantage. Use it to grow that residue. And we're going to stick a moisture probe in when we get to my place, and you'll see what the residue is able to do. But that's the biggest thing. Keep the soil surface covered. The other thing is you got to have diversity, because soil biology is amazing, and you have to feed it. And soil biology takes a wide variety of those root exudates, so you need to have diversity. Corn-soybean rotation makes absolutely zero sense, except unless you're